lighten this issue. It was just 3 weeks ago when we sat in Athens, Georgia. Vince Thompson, the chairman and the founder of Melt, a group out of Atlanta that plays a big role in sports marketing, also a huge role in staging many events for the NCAA basketball tournament, talked about what could be a long, protracted fight in court. Well, all of that has changed, and Vince Thompson joining us to begin our second hour. Vince, thanks again. Great to have you on, and let's try to figure out how we got to this point today. This caught a lot of us by surprise. Good afternoon.
Hey, Paul, and good afternoon. Thank you for having me back. Yeah, it's a historic day today. I figured they must have listened to me and you while we were in Athens 3 weeks ago, because this is tracking exactly as we said it should.
Well, let's try to figure out, maybe since we've been on the air, we've yet to learn a whole lot more from the NCAA, from your read, from your sources, the people with whom you deal with on a constantly daily basis. What do we know from what they have told us so far?
Well, I think several things are in play. I think, first of all, this is a clear victory for common sense and for the student athletes. I think that's where you've got to start. I think the second thing is that they probably saw the handwriting on the wall, particularly when you begin to get the federal government involved. And so when you're visiting senators and you're visiting congressmen, and then you begin to go down that path, which obviously leads to more legislation and more courts and more exposure, I think they said, hey, let's step back. And if you noticed in the first line, they said an important step to enhance opportunities, which is what you and I talked about 3 weeks ago, evolve from an enforcement institution to an enhancement institution. And I think today is a big step, but it's obviously too. Let's put these resources to good use as opposed to federal legislation and court fights and legal fees and those types of things.
Yeah, I think we were joking the other day in Athens that the biggest winners were going to be law firms, because when law firms get involved in this type of litigation, they're in no hurry to see it end.
No, as we all know, conflict is an industry, and conflict resolution is not. So the big losers today would be the lawyers for sure, which makes a lot of people happy, including myself.
Yeah, no, well, count me in on that. Let me try to figure out, though, in terms of the California legislation and legislation that continues to be introduced all across the country, what does it mean to that? Because everyone is different, and without the NCAA, and I'm sure they will at some point give us more information. It doesn't seem like they have a lot of finality yet, other than they're moving in this direction.
No, there's not a lot of finality, but what they did signal today is a willingness to say, okay, let's all get together at the table and come up with some common sense measures, Paul. And again, let's put the 1 to 5%, the Tuas, the Froms, the Zion Williamsons to the side, and I keep going back to what about the 99.9% of the other non-revenue student athletes? This could lead to career exposure, career advancement, non-playing opportunities all over the place. If programs such as the Auburn Equestrian Program get a couple of extra nickels or a couple of extra exposure, then why is that a bad thing for everybody? Why is that a bad thing for that young lady to be exposed to different employers like myself out there? And so if this is properly managed, it's going to be a great day for everybody. And here's what else you've got coming down the line. You've got esports coming down the line, which is going to be another major issue, which was pushing this as well, because these kids want to be paid and they want to play. And so there's you look at the next round of media rights negotiations. Over the top, streaming, and social media companies were probably pushing this a little bit as well, because who stands to gain in this by more clicks and more views of Jake Fromm on YouTube than these major social media companies?
And so let me ask you about the CEOs in the room here, and those are the college presidents, because we heard Michael Drake. This was his group. He's the president of Ohio State, very well known from last year's brouhaha with Urban Meyer. When we were together in Athens, and I bring that up because you have a son who's a freshman at Athens. He's friends with a lot of students, including athletes, and you and I had the occasion being out that night to run into Jerry Moorhead, who's the highly respected and revered president at UGA. So in knowing people like President Moorhead and so many others, as well as the students, I mean, what is the connection, though, with where those CEOs are sitting with someone like your son, Carter, who's just one of many, even though he's quite an outstanding student, on that campus?
Well, there's many issues in play here. First of all, Dr. Moorhead was a hugely successful attorney and litigator, so he probably understood this issue more uniquely than others. And I'm positive he was weighing in a positive manner. Secondly, these university presidents are surrounded by tens of thousands of these students every day who are able to take advantage of social media and who are able to be compensated by it, such as my son. And so they knew there was an imbalance or an inequity of the haves and the have-nots of the students and the students' athletes. Ironically, was sort of inverse to how it was all supposed to be designed. And so a third thing is a lot of the corporate CEOs have already called me today, and they go, well, what does this mean? And I said, well, we're all still trying to figure this out. But what it does mean is that it's a step in the right direction for leveling the playing field, pun intended, for all of these student athletes to be able to talk more freely about themselves and to be compensated in some form. We all focus on this word compensation, but 99.9% of these kids, most of their scholarships are not even full scholarships. So I could see a really, really nice financial advantage for a lot of these kids who, the equestrian team, I use them as an example, they practice as hard or harder than the football or basketball team. So I just see a lot of upside here.
Vince, will the student athletes be satisfied? I ask you that question without knowing, and maybe they don't know all the details yet, but I mean, the one thing we can't afford here is for it to look like something's being pulled over their eyes.
Well, there's several things in play. These kids on the field now, the most sophisticated, I say this all the time, of consumers of this generation because of technology, social media, and access to the information. The other thing that was really, really looming in the background, and I know I'm going to get some pushback from this from a lot of people, though, is that the inequity of who's being paid what versus who's not being paid what. So you've got billions of dollars exchanged during college football and billions of dollars exchanged during college basketball. And granted, scholarships are great. The facilities are amazing. I see them at all the campuses that I go on. But at some point, the inequity was going to create some imbalance where my fear was something even more drastic or dramatic was going to happen. And so I think this has at least let the air out of the balloon a little bit where everybody can now get to the table. And I applaud the NCAA for stepping up to the table, acknowledging the debate, allowing common sense and some clear heads to be inserted in this process because you can't always say that's happened in the past.
Yeah, but there is, speaking of pushback, I mean, there is already some pushback from special interest groups that have always been opposed to the NCAA, including one, Ramogi Huma, who has been associated with the Drake Group and others. He said today, I think this is a bit of smoke and mirrors here, which signals that the NCAA is still going to oppose players receiving real compensation. Now, of course, we're talking about two different issues. It seems like you give them an inch and they want a foot, so to speak. On the issue of likeness, I think that issue is seeding, but you don't believe they're ever going to budge on compensation, do you?
No, I don't think so. And if they do, they'll have to set it up where it goes into some form of escrow after the student athlete's playing days or career is over. I do think you'll see EA produce some other games. I think you'll see those compensation and royalties go into the fund. I think that could be the opening salvo of how esports is played collegiately on campuses as well. And, Paul, if your audience has not read the Taylor Branch article in The Atlantic many years ago about the true definition of student athlete, you need to go back and look at that, because this is tied into the federal government, the definition of student athlete, the definition of amateur athletics, and a lot of federal funding. So forget the media and the nickel and dime scrum. There's billions of dollars in stake and in play tied into federal funding of these universities and the student athletic programs.
Thank you very much, Vince. We will continue this conversation. Great to have you on.
Thank you, sir.
Vince Thompson, the founder of MELT. And by the way, I do think there will be some pushback here because there are those who just simply don't trust the NCAA. And it's worth remembering, it is not against the law to profit from likeness. It's just simply against the NCAA bylaws. There is a distinction. We are going to take a break and get your rose out, because it's been a while since we've had P.J. Fleck on this program. He has made the jump to Minnesota, and is that boat ever going against the grain and against the tide? We'll talk to Coach Fleck after this.